passes. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. With every Democrat voting yes and all but one Republican voting no, the House has approved a resolution urging Vice President Pence to convene a cabinet meeting and invoke the 25th Amendment to remove President Trump from office, even though the Vice President told House Speaker Pelosi in a letter prior to the vote he would not take the action that she and other congressional Democrats have demanded, believing it's not in the country's best interest. Wednesday, the House considers a second impeachment of the president.
Be careful what you wish for.
A defiant President Trump warning Democrats that the rush to impeach him for a second time will absolutely hurt the country.
It's causing tremendous anger and division and pain, far greater than most people will ever understand, which is very dangerous for the USA, especially at this very tender time.
Lawmakers on Capitol Hill are expected to vote to impeach him for a second time for, in their view, inciting the violence that rocked the Capitol last week, a notion he again rejected, saying that his speech was, quote, totally appropriate.
Fox's Kevin Corke, 3,000 National Guard troops being posted outside the Capitol.
Montgomery. This would be the first time the federal government's executed a woman since 1953. Montgomery was convicted of killing a pregnant woman in Missouri, then cutting her baby from the womb. Montgomery's lawyers had argued she's not mentally competent. Defense experts had said Montgomery also experiences delusions. She's now scheduled to be the 11th person in the past 7 months to be put to death by the federal government.
Fox's Jill Nato, America.
Half a day. This is Clara Manglona from Security Title with an important warning. Wire fraud is real, and home buyers and sellers are one of the biggest targets, even on Guam. When sending money by wire transfer, be sure to confirm the wire instructions by phone, not email. In this case, it's good to be suspicious and know who you're dealing with. Let the professionals at Security Title work with you to minimize loss due to wire fraud. We are here to help.
Are you fed up with those long bank lines? Do you wish you had a bank who gave you faster service? Well, by enrolling in Bank Pacific's new mobile app, you don't even need to wait in line. But even if you do want to come down in person, we're more than happy to see your smiling face, as long as you have a mask. Because our service is so good, we don't believe in lines. Because for 66 years, we've been making sure you get the service you deserve. Because where others put branches, we place roots. And we're rooting for you. Member FDIC.
The U.S. Supreme Court has upheld a Trump administration decision to reimpose a federal rule about the so-called morning after pill.
A 6-3 decision allows the Trump administration to reimpose an in-person requirement for women obtaining an abortion pill approved to end an early pregnancy or manage a miscarriage. A federal judge suspended the rule in July because of the coronavirus, saying at the time the public health risk for patients had increased during the pandemic. Similar rules have been suspended for other drugs during the same period. The incoming Biden administration could put the in-person requirement back on hold after the president-elect takes office. Jared Halpern, Fox News.
The Supreme Court has also lifted lower court stays blocking the execution of the only woman on federal death row. It's not clear when the Federal Bureau of Prisons may move to lethally inject Lisa Montgomery, convicted of killing a pregnant woman in 2004 and removing the baby from the victim's womb. 2 other pending federal executions have been delayed.
A judge has ordered a delay in the executions of federal inmates Corey Johnson and Dustin Higgs. Both were scheduled to be put to death this week in an Indiana prison, but both are also sickened with the coronavirus, which can damage lung tissue. The virus, combined with a lethal injection, could fill their lungs with liquid, giving them a sense of drowning. Lawyers for Johnson and Higgs argued that would amount to torture. The judge has delayed their executions till at least March. At that time, President-elect Joe Biden will be commander-in-chief, and he opposes the death penalty. Tom Graham, Fox News.
The United Nations counterterrorism chief is warning that terrorists are exploiting the COVID-19 pandemic and appealing to new racially, ethnically, and politically motivated violent extremist groups, adding the threat of terrorism has persisted, evolved, and spread. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
You heard of double mile credit card rewards? You can forget all about that. At First Hawaiian Bank, we're stepping it up.
Biases pose a threat to democracy. We recognize that it may be counterintuitive to suggest that a social media platform is anti-democratic at its core. Well, you could get me to believe that. Allow us to elaborate. All communications technologies have inherent structural biases that make them good at some things and poor at others. Twitter is no exception. We explained in our book, quote, The Twitter Presidency. Jose, make a note. Tell me never to spend any money on that book, would you please?
Is this an ad or an op-ed?
Twitter is defined by its biases of simplicity, impulsivity, and incivility. Consequently, the platform is not a suitable medium to foster serious, sustained, reasoned, and rational public discourse and deliberation like tall tales. Not only does it not do these things, it cannot do them, at least not well. Twitter traffics in vitriol and violence. The tragic events of Wednesday are a consequence of that fact. So it's not Trump's fault, it's Twitter's fault.
The overacting in this theater.
Moreover, and this is the point that we as a nation must grapple with, those structural biases are uniquely amenable to far-right racist ideologies that frame the world in simplistic black and white terms. It's been more than 20 years now since Jeffrey Schur, or maybe it should be pronounced Sewer, published his book, quote, The Soundbite Society, in which he argued that society is moving inexorably towards simplistic and emotional communication that is tailor-made for the values and messages of the right. The fundamental problem here is not Trump, or at least not exclusively Trump. It's that social media generally, and Twitter specifically, is conducive to right-wing and reactionary rhetoric like Trump and his followers. Therefore, they should be kept off Twitter. Yes, of course, there are millions of positive and uplifting messages on these platforms, but messages of hate travel further and faster. They are amplified. That is what's meant by structural bias. Last week, we witnessed the dark and disturbing consequences of Trump's authoritarian, hate-filled, anti-democratic words and the power of communication medium so conducive to his punchlines. Banning Trump from Twitter will not alter the anti-democratic biases of Twitter, nor change the structural oppressions Twitter's simplicity intensifies. We need, instead, deeper engagement with the communicative forms of reactionary rhetoric and the social and cultural conditions that make this rhetoric appalling. Maybe we should just, professors, Professor Ott and Professor Dickinson, why don't you come out and say we should ban Twitter?
You know, I have a Twitter account, Bob, and the reason why I stay away from it is because I can't understand how the left can be so vile with a straight face. It's almost like they work for Gura. Right. But anyways, it's amazing reading this and I wonder is this Babylon Bee or is this really serious people?
Really?
It's incredible.
It is. And I read that just because if there's anybody out there in our international radio listening audience of tailgaters that doesn't know what we're up against, that's a good example. These guys are university professors.
Of communication.
Of communication. Can you imagine what kind of crap they're teaching their students? It's no wonder that we're having the kinds of problems that we're having in our country because it's been overcome by the left. And I've been through the whole Frankfurt School, cultural Marxism, neo-Marxism thing. Enough. It's here. You know, I used to hear people say, well, I sure don't like the way things are going. I kind of feel sorry for my grandchildren. Well, guys, it's not your grandchildren. It's here, and it's now. and it's going to get much worse after January 20. Okay, let's move on to the Post. And the Post is not taking on anything controversial. I guess they got that out of their system with their last two editorials. Process to help students get internet at home needs to speed up. That's enough. I don't need to read the whole editorial. You can say it all in one sentence, Post. All right, so let's go from there to the card. I've got program notes here for January 6th, as we're January 13. And Clint makes it to the top of the card again. Clint carries on his battle with the CCU and PUC. Why do we need a consolidated commission on utilities and a public utilities commission when we have Senator Clint Rogel? Seems like such a waste of effort, doesn't it? I made this observation before. Maybe what we ought to do is have a constitutional convention, and then the constitutional convention junk this idea of a three-branch government. Maybe what we really need is a parliamentary form of government. So we would elect our parliament, and then the members of parliament would select from their number ministers to run various parts of the government. So if we had that, Clint could be the Minister of Public Utilities. So we wouldn't need a John Beneventi or Miguel Bradallo. Clint would run the two utilities as the Minister for Public Utilities. And then we wouldn't need to waste money with the CCU and the Public Utilities Commission, etc. So that's the first item on the card. Then we've got Frank Blas takes on Republicans who favor a citizens' legislature, and James W. Moylan. Did I talk about this yesterday? Jim Walk Moylan and his Bill 1736.
I don't think we got to it.
I didn't think so, yeah. And then in Tall Tales versus Van, I take on an old liberal friend. And we get into this, who needs to be punished because of Trump and that particular item on the card. Racism raises its ugly head when Vogue's cover photo of Kamala doesn't pass muster with Vokesters. And then shouldn't the heirs of Frank Paris be singing the Give the Land Back to the Original Owner song? And Guam versus USA heads to the Supreme Court. I've got Angel Sablon's endorsement of Jesse Bloss is still relevant. I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm sure the next time someone goes in for sentencing at the district court, we can come back to Angel's endorsements. I think he's a one-trick pony. Maybe that's the reason CCU brought him on and is paying him $98,000. So that when people are sentenced for heavy-duty crimes, Angel can speak up in their behalf, kind of a public defender. And then Dominion gives Sidney Powell a chance to prove her claims, and Simon Black compliments Prager by explaining the new theocracy and a couple of old items that have been on there for quite a while. So let's start out with Clint versus the CCU. And this is an article from the Post. Rogel suggests eliminating CCU and PUC over solar energy rate issue. See what I told you? The way to fix the CCU and the PUC is just off with their office. And then the subheading is Administrative Law Judge says Senators reviving failed legislation. Senator Clint Rogel has introduced legislation aimed at supporting the growth of renewable power. But according to Fred Urecki, the Administrative Law Judge for the Public Utilities Commission, the bill is simply a retread of legislation that failed in the 35th. and one that would ultimately increase rates for customers who haven't been able to afford solar energy. In response, Rigel suggested that the rate-setting PUC and the Consolidated Commission on Utilities, which directly oversees the power and water utilities, should be disbanded. I guess he's going the whole part-time legislature. I'll see your part-time legislature and raise you a disband. Here's a quote from Clint. They claim that everything will cause a raise in the rates, but so far, only 3 things have proven to raise rates. 1, the price of oil. 2, the CCU. 3, the PUC. The net metering program seeks to eliminate the price of oil, but perhaps we should really eliminate all 3. I could have helped Clint with his phraseology a little bit there. Try this one on the next time that you're in front of a reporter, Clint. CCU, PUC, we don't need no stinking CCU and PUC. Yeah. While the CCU and PUC are involved in the process of establishing power and water rates, the CCU approves petition requests and the PUC grants final approval. The CCU and PUC have made decisions involving both rate increases and decreases. The latest rate increase was for the Waterworks Authority as part of a 5-year capital improvement plan. Both the CCU and PUC have supported the rate decreases for power utility. The PUC has capped net metering to 10% of the island's peak power demand in 2017, or 10% of 261 megawatts. I think that's about 26 megawatts. The net metering credit is also currently set at full rate retail rate by PUC. Net metering is the program for the Power Authority customers who utilize renewable power and get credit for feeding excess energy back into the power grid. For Guam, renewable energy credit has largely applied to customers who generate solar power. So if you've got those photovoltaic cells on your roof, etc., and in the daytime you're generating power, more power than you need, you sell it back to the CCU and to the Power Authority, and the Power Authority pays you the same price that it sells it to everybody else for. This kind of reminds me of the old story about how do you make money on the stock market? Let me see if I got it right. Buy high, sell low, and make it up in volume. Buy at one price, sell at the same price, eat the overhead, keep your fingers crossed. GPA has long maintained that at that retail rate, customers who receive credit for the solar energy they send back to the power grid are subsidized by other ratepayers because they can avoid paying the cost of using the power grid despite using GPA power when solar energy is unavailable. When would solar energy be unavailable? I'm not an electrical engineer, but I think at night. Solar energy is not available at night. So no matter how many photovoltaic cells you've got on the roof of your house, when the sun goes down, you got to plug into the grid. So when do you suppose the island sells more power, at night or in the daytime? I suspect people will use more power at night. So this is a really nice deal for folks with the photovoltaic cells. It's really a raw deal for all the rest of us. Clint's, as were Rigel's Bill 10-36, would increase the cap to 20% of the island's peak demand and set the net metering rate at full retail by law. In other words, Clint's if Clint's bill became law, the Public Utilities Commission would no longer be able to say this is the rate that can be charged. Clint would set the rate as whatever GPA sells the electricity to residential customers for, it has to buy at that same price from residential customers with solar power generation. Regil's 10-36 would increase the cap to 20% of the island's peak demand and set the net metering rate at full retail by law, with an option to petition changes when capacity is reached for customers who want to enter the program afterward. The bill would also bar adding new net metering customers after capacity is reached until a cost-benefit study is completed. A little cart before the horse there. We ought to do these things, Clint, before we start talking about increasing the cap to 20%. Bill 10 is essentially the same bill as Bill 315-35, a measure Rigel introduced in the prior legislature, which would effectively strip the PUC of its rate-setting duties in terms of net metering. In the last legislature, there were at least 2 public hearings on Bill 315 with extensive testimony from GPA and PUC in opposition, Fred Hurecki said. The committee chairman admitted at the hearing that the purpose of the bill was to remove the ability of the PUC to alter or change the rate of compensation for net metering customers. The bill went nowhere. Now it appears that GPA and PUC will once again have to expend time and effort to oppose what is clearly an inorganic bill that violates the GPA bond covenants. ORIC, the firm acting as GPA bond counsel, stated that Bill 315 would have limited or altered the rights or powers of the PUC in a way that would breach the government's agreement with GPA's bond creditors. Moreover, by locking in the full retail rate for net metering, the bill deletes the PUC's authority to set rates for net metering and would likely result in an increase of rates for non-net metering customers, Hurecki added. And by setting the cap at 20%, the legislature would be nullifying the PUC's current order, he added. Okay, we got a break coming up here. Let me see who I got on the line here. Before we take this break, I've got Bob Kelly. We got a really knowledgeable caller here, Bob Kelly. Okay, Bob, hang on. Short break, and we're going to have you come back and preach the gospel to us.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at GuamTraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
$5 footlong. Pile high with veggies. They're back. Any footlong is a $5 footlong when you buy one at regular price. At participating locations, Subway, eat fresh.
Welcome back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, Guam's single voice of reason. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
Hey, good afternoon, Bob. Thanks for chiming in here on a subject that I know you're very familiar with.
I think, though, that probably some people are going to disagree with me. First off, there's 2 major problems with net metering at the full retail price. Actually, even a third. Nobody sells at retail price back to the wholesaler. That would make no sense. But getting more important, when they do the net metering, they have to use the infrastructure that is out there. Not only the infrastructure of the administrative cost, but the infrastructure of maintaining the entire power system, the transformers, the lines, and so on. And since they're using that, that has to be included in the cost. But a second reason it's not a good idea and should not be done is you have two things you have to do to be able to deal with solar power, whether it's a solar farm or whether it's solar power coming from individuals. If you are in the middle of the afternoon and the cloud goes by the sun, and occasionally on Guam, I've seen clouds once in a while, maybe you have also, and the sun drops quite a bit, there has to be an instantaneous increase in that by either a battery, which GPA is spending lots of money on, but these people don't want to pay the cost towards the battery, or spinning reserve. Otherwise, there's going to be blackouts, because if you don't have the spinning reserve or you don't have a battery, then that power usage, the usage is constant. The amount of energy coming in because of the sun going by, a cloud coming by and taking it down, will drop it. So they need to pay for the cost of the infrastructure to maintain steady power and to do the distribution. So to me, if they go down this path, it is absolutely correct. It would force every other ratepayer who's not doing net metering to pay for the infrastructure to support the people who put in the solar cells. If they want to have net, they should put in their own batteries so they don't have to put the thing back into there, and then they can just use the battery at night on their own. Then they don't have to pay for it.
All good points, Bob. But, you know, there's one argument that seems to carry an awful lot of weight, and it's just so easy to express, and that's this. Yeah, but solar power is green.
That's true.
It doesn't put any. It doesn't put any carbon into the atmosphere. Therefore, it's great, right?
The only way we can move towards the metering is the utility should be using their avoided cost. What do they avoid by the kilowatt that is put into the system? They may avoid some fuel usage, and they may avoid a little bit of generator usage, but the transmission lines and the spinning reserve and battery still has to be there. And the spinning reserve that's there to make up when the sun goes by is still burning fuel. So, I mean, it does not make sense that they should get the free ride. So it has to be based upon the avoidance, the cost avoidance factor. What does the GP avoid paying by having that online? Not what are they selling the power at when it includes the entire administrative, billing, metering, and infrastructure for power line distribution.
I think I'm ready to rule, Bob. Jose, are we ready to rule here? Yeah, I'm ruling in favor of CCU, PUC, and I'm ruling against Clint Rigel. And Clint, this is almost race judicata. You had your chance last time and you lost. Now you're coming back with the same case, trying again. So we've had enough, haven't we, Bob?
Well, somebody's going to have to pay for the infrastructure, the batteries, and the spinning reserve. So basically, let's change the name of the bill to let's make the ratepayers who don't have solar pay for the extra cost of solar.
Good idea, Bob.
That's being honest.
Really appreciate your coming in and setting the record straight on this one. Thank you, Bob.
Sure. Bye-bye.
Yeah, it's a guy who understands this stuff to a fairly well and can explain it quite clearly. Okay, sorry, Clint. I'm not going to tell you back to the drawing board because you got a flawed idea. Imagine if the grocery business were like this, that you know, that you could if you baked bread, you could sell the bread to the supermarket for the same price that they sell it to everybody else, but they'd have to haul flour and sugar and whatever else you need to make the bread to your house for you, so you could make the bread. You know, it's kind of the same thing. As Bob says, you know, it doesn't make sense for the retailer to buy it back from the wholesaler at the retail price. It doesn't make sense. Okay, let's go on to Frank Blas versus part-time legislature. And as usual, the poet laureate of Tall Tales has set the tone for that particular item on the card. And here's what he said. Where is it? A legislature part-time would be quite sublime and limit the damage they cause. Their boneheaded moves undoubtedly proves this point and gives us great pause. So, senators, hark. This isn't a lark. The people mean business this time. Start packing your bags or hoist your white flags. We're through with your organized crimes. Okay, well, thus saith the poet laureate of Tall Tales. Let me see here. Maybe I got one more phone call here before I launch into the next item on the card. Another Joe. What a surprise. Another Joe. You could knock, if you had a feather, you could knock me over with a feather, Jose. And good afternoon, another Joe. Long time no talk. It's been all the 24 hours, I think, right?
Possibly. So, Kebab, I want to take a little bit of a dissenting opinion. In theory, if the majority of the population of Guam wants a part-time legislature, shouldn't we put it up for a vote the same way that we put up the issue of medical marijuana or recreational marijuana or, any other issue that's really important and determine what percentage of the population is in favor of a part-time legislature, as opposed to just simply which majority of political party and which political party is the majority of the legislature, because that might not be the specific reason why that party's in control of the legislature, regarding a part-time legislature. What do you think, Club?
Well, at one time, I was not at all in favor of government by referendum or government by initiative. I thought that, that government was too important to entrust to amateurs. But after I saw some of the things that our legislature did, I kind of modified my position on that. So now I would say that perhaps initiatives are tolerable when we're talking about large structural changes in our government, or when we're talking about changes in the law that have dramatic social effects. And I'm not so sure about the second one, but the first one, when we went from 21 down to 15, that was on the basis of a referendum, because it was a really significant change in the way we do business. And then there's one other dimension here. It's pretty hard to get 21 people to say, yeah, really 6 of us ought to stay home and lose our seats. Or for the entrenched ones here in the full-time legislature to say, we're going to change this so you won't have this really cushy job that you like so well, that you work so hard to get and work so hard to keep. You're just going to have to work on you're going to have to be a citizen that does this as an avocation rather than a vocation. Pretty hard to get people to make what they think is a sacrifice. So probably the only way to get there is with a referendum. I think there's a danger in trivializing the process, like, how much are we going to charge for electricity, et cetera, another Joe.
I agree. It's important. We should definitely have a dialogue regarding the utilities. Thanks for your time, Bob. Before I go, I want to ask you real quick. The vaccine that's available now, I think it's Moderna.
Yeah.
Is that good or bad?
Bad. It's bad if you think that using cell lines from aborted fetuses in the development process is bad, then that's Moderna.
Okay, thanks for your time, Bob, and Happy New Year again.
Same to you, another Joe. Okay, so before I launch into Frank Blas versus part-time legislature, I'm going to entertain our good friend Frenchie. Good afternoon, Frenchie.
Good afternoon, Bob. Yeah, how are you?
Good.
A couple of things. Yesterday, after I spoke, then Ron McNich called back, and he was talking. He took some of the points I was making, and he talked about the the cartels that have become those GAFA, the Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and he likened it to the robber barons of the late 19th century, early 20th century, and what President Theodore Roosevelt did in order to break their back. But I think he failed to see two things. Number one, in the 1990s, there was a huge switch in the capitalism way of doing things, where actually until the 1990s, companies would produce products and resell it, and this is how capitalism used to work. And then everybody kind of the idea was that everybody, from the workers that produce the product, the investors, the manufacturers, everybody would get back the profit from those sales and the success of the company. Starting in the 1990s, you have the invention of what's called the capitalization of investments, and it's basically it went for the theory that the only people that should benefit from those things would be the investors. Forget the workers, forget the other people that were done in the process, and which is what led us to the situation where we're in now, where most of our manufacturing has emigrated overseas, mostly to China, but other places. And so he failed to see that, and he failed also to see that this was a weakening of the traditional Democratic Party background, which were the workers, quote unquote. All right. So so it's not new. Like we have seen it happen with the robber barons. But when you're taking in consideration that what is happening in the country right now, in conjunction with the lockdown, with this virus epidemic that we're having, the concentration of power by a very small group of people, which I call the oligarchs of the tech company, and the fact that starting in 2004, those same people bought pennies on the dollar a faltering industry, which was the news industry, both written, spoken, all spoken, written, and on TV. They're basically controlling now all the information space, especially because they're also controlling the social media. And this is something that has never happened until now, which is an unrivaled political power. And those people, not only now, they are investing in the people that are pushing their agenda. And so this is a totally different ballgame. The power of those companies now is bigger than the power of the state. And this is why in the last few days, even in Europe, which has recognized that you can control speech, but it has to be done by the states, all the steps taken by Google and all those companies to limit the speech of the President of the United States. Can you imagine this? These people are limiting the speech of the highest office in the land. And they are doing it without involving any legal process. And so you even have a gross-mutti Angela Merkel, who was critical of this, and she's a kind of a Christian Democrat. You had a socialist like Macron who decried the process. And you have even people that we have propped up against the Russians that are saying, whoa, 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 be careful with all that censorship, because we are, as opponents of hardcore regime like Russia and China, and now we're going to be opposed to the fact that we don't need to receive any lesson from anybody, because look at what the United States, who is supposed to be the champion of freedom, doing to their own president. So this is one thing that I think a lot of people were missing, including Ron, yesterday in his analysis. And and you remarked earlier that nobody put pressure on Twitter. Yeah, the one person put pressure on Twitter was Crazy Nancy.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, most of the people that are very radical right now it's the old Burton machine, Democratic Party machine. I don't know if you are aware of Senator Burton, who was a state senator in Northern California.
Phil Burton.
Phil Burton
was a household word around here in the 70s, Frenchie.
Yeah, because Phil Burton was basically had built a political machine unseen since the famous one in New York City, which basically controlled the whole political process to this day in California. And he was the one making the putting powerful people in place, like Barbara Boxer, who is now had to resign from a position because she was acting as an agent for a Chinese surveillance company. Now, she was found and she said, I resigned from that position. Lady Di, we know, had a Chinese spy working for her for 20 years. Then, of course, you have Crazy Nancy, who is also from San Francisco, even though her dad is from Baltimore. And people forget, in the number 2 for Beijing Biden is Kamala Harris, whose sugar daddy was Mayor Brown, who was also the Speaker of the House in California for all those years. So all those people have been infiltrated by the Chinese, and they are definitely backed up by GAFA and all those internet people. So it's very interesting. And it was a big joke on the internet about Swalwell, with the Democratic representative from the Danville area in the East Bay in California, and now they call him the spy who shagged me. And if my mother heard it, and she would tell me, "Oh, behave." But I had a question. It's a legal question.
Fire away.
We've seen this weekend this huge attempt to try to stifle speech, especially of the president, but anybody that's conservative. And there are some people that have been pushing this story about the famous 1946 case of SCOTUS, which is Marsh versus Alabama. I think it was, I'm not sure, but I think it was 326 U.S. 501 or 502, I forgot. But it's interesting in so many cases because it was a case that basically said that the property rights are not sufficient to justify restriction of citizens' fundamental right. In this case, it was a free speech issue from a Jehovah's Witness, Mrs. March, who was cited for passing leaflets on the properties of one of those company towns back in the 30s. And I think, if I'm not wrong, I think it was Hugo Black, the infamous Supreme Court justice. He was infamous because he was the only known KKK member to ever sit on SCOTUS, and he stayed there until 1971. He was a big.
Well, he was a Democrat, wasn't he?
Well, he was a big New Dealer too. He was a big backer of Roosevelt.
So what's the holding? What's the holding again in Marsh versus Alabama, Frenchie?
Well, basically, the Supreme Court decided that private property cannot be used as a excuse to limit the free speech of people.
Oh, okay.
And so basically it was kind of a narrow application because it's something that happened in one of those company towns, which have basically disappeared. I mean, there's still a few in the West, some of those logging areas, but it's basically disappeared. But back in 1996, suddenly you started seeing lawyers using that case to argue for free speech against internet companies. You had a cyber law case, cyber promotion versus AOL, which at the time was one of the biggest internet provider, because they wanted to mass mail through AOL, and they said no. And basically, they argued that under the March case, it was an infringement on their First Right Amendment, and the Ninth Circuit disagreed with them. Never went to the Supreme Court. And then more recently, you had Lloyd versus Tanner, and the Scotians agreed that in this case, it was a mall that wanted to control what was distributed on its premises, and they agreed that because a mall was not like a sidewalk, like in the Marsh case, people could regulate free speech within a mall. But a few years later, you have Manhattan Community Access versus Halleck, where Scotus ruled that private companies can only count as state actors on the First Amendment for First Amendment purpose if they exercise powers traditionally exclusive to the state, which the way I read it is exactly what the GAFAs have been doing over this past weekend. And there's been a lot of talk about this on the internet, and people are saying, well, do Parler and other companies like Rumble have a good case against those big guys who are trying to stifle them from even using the internet services to basically shut them up and take them out of business? So the big question is, do you think that kind of case like this could be something that the Supreme Court can look at down the road?
Yeah, but I wouldn't hold out a whole lot of. I wouldn't put a whole lot of chips on that particular part of the board, Frenchie. I'm somewhat aware of the Supreme Court treating private property as the functional equivalent of the public square, which is kind of like the Marsh there. But you know, when the government comes in and says you must allow this kind of speech, that in itself is a regulation on free speech.
Yeah.
Because people should be free to say, not only free to say what they want to say, but free to avoid saying what they don't want to say. It's very interesting, very interesting.
But in this case, it would be actually the opposite. It would be the Supreme Court confirming their decision that private companies cannot regulate the speech of other people when they take over the duties of the state or the privilege.
Yeah, well, I could see that in the case of the company town, where in the company town, you know, you got your company equivalent of fire department and police department, et cetera. Yeah. But when it's the internet, et cetera, you don't have the proprietors of companies on the internet acting like the Federal Communications Commission. Very interesting, Frenchie. I'm going to take a look at this. I'll probably put it on the card tomorrow, but I think Jose's signaling we got break for the half.
Time for a break, yeah.
The big halftime show, right?
Just listen to the music. We have about 30, another minute.
Another minute. Okay.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thank you for your time. And if you can look into it, I think there is good arguments on both sides of the thing. And I think companies like Parler and Rumble, who have been kind of the beacons for free speech, are being silenced. And I think it could be that the fact that they are being silenced by the people that control all the things, it could be interpreted in the way like in the Marsh case, because they are substituting themselves for the government.
Okay, Frenchie, very interesting, very stimulating. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
All right.
The Ray Gibson Show. Starring Senator Mona Silva Tyron as the news anchor.
I'm Mona Silva Tyron, and I'll have your local news every morning. Life moves pretty fast, so stay with us to stay informed right here on The Point.
Also starring Jerry Roberts as the Better Business Training Guru.
Get out there and do something good today. Like listen to us, Monday through Friday, 6 to 10 a.m., where we go extra for you.
Produced by the real Joe Cruz. And your warm and intelligent host, Ray Gibson.
It's the Gibson Stream of Consciousness. All the players and all the games with cameos and calls from the most interesting people like you. We'll see and hear you right here on your talk radio superstation. This is The Point.
The Ray Gibson Show was filmed before a live Facebook audience.
Want to win $100? Join the Guam Visitors Bureau's Protect Guam campaign series to show how you're helping our island in the fight against COVID-19. There are 2 ways to win. Upload your photos or videos to visitguam.com or share on social media how you're wearing your mask, showcasing Guam heroes, or staying active and healthy with the Protect Guam hashtag. Don't forget to download the Guam COVID Alert app. Let's protect and support each other through these tough times. For a chance to win $100, check out visitguam.com.
Go ahead, I'm listening.
Open the Point app.
Opening.
Live stream, on demand, swap stations, check out the visual radio. Get the free app available on the App Store and Google Play, or go to thepoint.gu.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Pushing for the 25th Amendment. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News.
It is an unprecedented moment in history because the danger that he poses.
House Speaker Pelosi late Tuesday urging the House to pass a resolution asking the Vice President to help them remove President Trump from office. Along party lines, with one Republican exception, the House passed the resolution urging Vice President Pence and the Cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment. Despite the fact the Vice President told the Speaker in a letter prior to the vote he did not believe that was in the best interests of the nation. So on Wednesday, the House will likely vote to impeach President Trump a second time. The president remaining defiant.
The impeachment hoax is a continuation of the greatest and most vicious witch hunt in the history of our country and is causing tremendous anger and division and pain, far greater than most people will ever understand.
The president speaking at the U.S. southern border wall Tuesday to mark construction of 450 miles of that wall. National Guard troops are forming a human wall around the U.S. Capitol building for Wednesday's debate and impeachment vote. The president has been blocked from another social media platform. YouTube says it is preventing any uploads to his account for at least 7 days, claiming the account has been in violation of YouTube's policies. For the first time in 67 years, the federal government has executed a woman. Lisa Montgomery was given a lethal injection at the federal prison in Terre Haute, Indiana, about a half an hour ago, only hours after the U.S. Supreme Court lifted lower court stays blocking it. Montgomery was convicted of the 2004 murder of Bobby Jo Stinnett in Missouri, strangling her and cutting her unborn baby from the womb to keep as her own. Her attorney had argued years of abuse had left Montgomery mentally ill and she didn't understand what she was facing, and says the government has executed a damaged and delusional woman. America is listening to Fox News.
Are you fed up with those long bank lines? Do you wish you had a bank who gave you faster service? Well, by enrolling in Bank Pacific's new mobile app, you don't even need to wait in line. But even if you do want to come down in person, we're more than happy to see your smiling face, as long as you have a mask. Because our service is so good, we don't believe in lines. Because for 66 years, we've been making sure you get the service you deserve. Because where others put branches, we place roots. And we're rooting for you. Member FDIC.
Day. This is Claire Manglona from Security Title with an important warning. Wire fraud is real, and home buyers and sellers are one of the biggest targets, even on Guam. When sending money by wire transfer, be sure to confirm the wire instructions by phone, not email. In this case, it's good to be suspicious and know who you're dealing with. Let the professionals at Security Title work with you to minimize loss due to wire fraud. We are here to help.
The U.S. is imposing new restrictions for inbound international travelers.
Citing a surge in coronavirus cases and an increasing number of a more contagious variant of the disease, anyone flying into the country will soon be required to have a negative COVID-19 test upon arrival. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention announcing that beginning on the 26th of this month, anyone flying into the U.S. will need to be tested before departure. In addition, the CDC urges those passengers to get tested 3 to 5 days after arrival and stay home for the first 7 days after their trip. Rich Dennison, Fox News.
Stay-at-home orders lifting for 13 Northern California counties because of improving hospital conditions. That means restaurants can welcome guests for indoor dining and hair and nail salons can reopen. But most of the state's population remains under tight restrictions because of the outbreak. Criminal charges are expected this week in the Flint, Michigan water crisis, including some for former government officials.
The Michigan Attorney General's office isn't commenting on any potential charges, but says the investigation is ongoing. According to the Detroit News, as many as 10 individuals are expected to be indicted as soon as Thursday for their roles in the Flint water crisis, including former Michigan Governor Rick Snyder, his top aide Rich Baird, and former State Health Director Nick Lyon, though it is not clear what kind of charges they are facing. Flint entered the national spotlight 6 years ago when, in an attempt to save money, the city switched its water source from Lake Huron to the Flint River. The move ultimately led to both state and national emergency declarations as the water supply for the city of 100,000 people became contaminated with lead from old pipes, along with bacteria that was blamed for a deadly outbreak of Legionnaire's disease.
Fox's Garrett Tenney, the state of Michigan, has reached an out-of-court settlement with families affected by the tainted water. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
It takes all of us to protect Guam. Join the Guam Visitors Bureau in our social media campaign series aimed to protect our island and each other in this COVID-19 era. Participate in the Protect Guam movement by wearing your mask, showcasing Guam's heroes, staying active, and downloading the Guam COVID Alert app. Post and share your content with us. Use the hashtag ProtectGuam, and you could win $100. It's that simple. Check out visitguam.com for details. Let's reclaim our lives, our economy, and our tourism industry.
Everyone has a busy schedule these days, and sometimes we forget to schedule our routine dental checkup and cleaning. Don't neglect your dental health. Schedule one today with Dr. Robert Yang and his Smile Team, conveniently located at the East West Business Center on Marine Drive, Upper Tumon. Call us today at 647-8702 or 3. Again, that's 647-8702 or 647-8703. We make smiles happen.
Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro in Hagåtña and Mezcla Dos Upper Tumon are now open for takeout and delivery services. For more information, call now at 479-2652 or 3 or Mezcla Dos at 646-6295. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro brings you island hospitality with the true taste of modern Chamorro cuisine at the comfort of your own home. They take your local favorite dishes and serve them with extra flair you will only find at Mezcla. Mezcla, a true taste of Guam.
Okay, so here we are, another big halftime show that we've all come to know and love so much. Second half of Tall Tales begins right now, and I start out with Frank Blas versus the part-time legislature. This is a story that ran in the Post. The first 4 days of their term, Republican Senators Moylan, Ada, Duenas, Brown introduced legislation on Thursday calling for a voter referendum to establish a part-time legislature. It's an idea that has received mixed reviews among prior sets of lawmakers. Republican senators who have pressed for reducing local senatorial positions to part-time jobs have argued this will attract a wider pool of talented residents who want to serve the public but don't want to give up their jobs or businesses. People who don't support the idea have argued the Guam legislature will make it harder for candidates who do not have deep pockets to run for senatorial office. I got to stop here. I hear this all the time. If you are running for senatorial office and you are not a senator, you're doing that with your own money. You're not doing that with, so full-time or part-time, you're going to have to spend, you're not going to spend government money getting your job. It's only after you're elected that that the deep pocket dimension is somewhat mollified, because after you're elected, then you're drawing $55,000 a year, and you can use some of that for your campaign expenses. People are much more willing to contribute to your campaign because you are a senator. And besides that, an awful lot of what you do as a senator is actually campaigning. So people don't support the idea, have argued the Guam legislature will make it harder for candidates who do not have deep pockets to run for senatorial office. The first time you run, everybody is the same. So if you do have a deep pocket and it's a part-time legislature, or you don't, you're not spending government money. So that only becomes an issue once you're elected. And the way it actually works is, so long as we're paying a living wage to people in the legislature to continue being senators, most people don't quit until they get beat. And second, it's a real advantage for the incumbent, because if you're a challenger, you got to go out there and raise the money. You got to establish some name ID. You've got to communicate your message. You've got to raise money, et cetera, all on your own. You don't have that $55,000 a year government salary that you get whether you do anything or not. And we saw during the 35th, not doing anything is an acceptable alternative. And it would make the 15-seat legislature less representative of the community. I can't think of a less representative body right now than our legislature. That's, year in, year out, there is a class of people, 300 or 400 or so, maybe not even that many, that rotate around from the administration to the legislature, et cetera. You don't see, very often do you see someone come out of nowhere and get elected to the legislature. Look at the ones that gave it a shot last time: Sanders So, Michelle Armenta, John Ananich, et cetera. People that came that were not prominent government in the government circle, didn't draw flies when they ran against people who are part of that clique that are part of the governmental class. So I can't, we don't have a diverse group of people in the legislature, and we haven't had since I can, maybe going back to the 60s when we still had a part-time legislature. I always mention that back, say, in the 7th, 8th, 9th, we had a butcher, Leonard Paulino, who ran Leonard's White House Market on the Hill in Senahania. We had a baker, Tommy Tanaka. Yeah, Tommy's Bakery. We didn't have any candlestick makers.
I was waiting and hoping.
Yeah, no candlestick makers, but
hard to keep wax here.
2 out of 3 ain't bad, right? So that's the way to have real diversity, is to let everybody start out on the same footing, and not have the system that so favors the incumbent. Bill 15-36 proposes to place on the 2022 general election ballot a voter referendum making the 15 senatorial seats part-time positions. If enacted, the Citizens Legislative Reform Act of 2021 would allow Guam to mirror a legislative structure incorporated by 40 state legislatures. If the measure would provide some savings to taxpayers while continuing to preserve the role of the legislative branch of the government, the four senators stated in a joint release. Bill 15-36 would create a centralized legislative bureau which would provide support and resources to elected senators. The bill would convert senatorial salaries to stipends and set 30-day sessions twice a year to address not only Organic Act mandates but also the work of the people. I don't know what that means. A part-time legislature would attract more candidates from various sectors of the community, the proponents stated, as prospective lawmakers would not have to leave their careers or situations to represent their peers. Whether a candidate is an educator, a medical professor, a student, or a stay-at-home parent, a citizens' legislature would bring an array of representatives entrusted with the authority to promote policies to benefit the community, the bill's authors contend. Bill 15-36 was introduced exactly a year after Moylan introduced 265-35. That measure proposed a part-time legislature, but a public hearing was never held because obviously the folks in the legislature are not going to pick up a hammer and smash their own rice bowls with it. The difference with this measure is that it allows voters of Guam to decide whether they would support a part-time legislature rather than senators making the decision, or actually not making the decision. The new bill's authors have simply stated the legislature redirects the focus of public service from one of optics to one of policy. That when it comes to your senators, it is the person and not their title which determines the amount of effort they chose to bring to the table. The authors further contend that Bill 15-36 opens up opportunities for many senators to consider public service without leaving their careers. No, there's a subtitle here, opposition. Yeah. And of course, the first person to oppose is Joe San Augustine. But I'm kind of giving him a pass because he's a Democrat. Good government? No, he's a Democrat. And here's what Joe San Augustine says. I know for a fact there are many things that we as senators have to do to make sure that we fulfill our obligations to the people. Being part-time would not allow for that. How do we expect people to truly represent the people of Guam? That's a direct quote from San Augustine. Yeah. And he goes on to say, if any of the current senators want a part-time legislature, maybe it's because they're only doing it part-time. Now, I want to remind you of something, Senator San Augustine. Do you remember Thanksgiving of last year? It was on a Thursday. Do you remember what you were doing the day after Thanksgiving, Senator? And do you remember what everybody else at our full-time legislature was doing? Nothing. You shut the place down. Well, you know, we're senators. What the heck? Teleworking. And do you remember in the depths of the pandemic, when we had so many emergencies to deal with, the legislature didn't meet for weeks, and the only thing that caused them to meet was Jim Moylan standing out in front of the building with a picket sign. He shamed you into meeting. So let me repeat what San Augustine said. If any of the current senators want a part-time legislature, maybe it's because they're only doing it part-time. Maybe they should be part-time. If the shoe fits, walk in it. And then he says, there are many things we as senators have to do to fulfill our obligations to the people. All those marriage ceremonies, going to the dead. Yeah, all of the recesses that we have during the time that we're in session. And I know how it works. I've spent enough time around that building, Joe, to know exactly how much time it really takes to do the job of a senator, if that's what you're concentrating on. 2 30-day sessions a year, you know, and in a government that's been in existence now for 70 years, we should get to the point where we've made most of the laws that we need to make. The budget is a repetitious process. We got to do that every year. But we should have a pretty good body of laws now. You know, we shouldn't have to horse around and come up with silly ideas like hate crime Jim Moylan or signs on the beach, a la Kelly Marsh, Titano, be careful of the water, you can drown in it. This stuff, that's activity. It's not accomplishment, it's just activity. So if senators really concentrated on doing the important stuff instead of the other stuff, part-time is plenty time. Okay, so he's a Democrat, so I give him a pass. But next we have Republican Senator Frank Blas Jr. He said he wants to see the details on how a part-time legislature would function given the limited time allowed for senators to do their job. Well, he could see that just by taking a look at Bill 15-36. I did. It's on the website, Frank. You could probably even get one of your staffers to read it to you if you're not up to it. And I have to say it's pretty well put together, and it pretty well covers the things that need to be done. There's a Legislative Research and Service Bureau where you'd have professional bill drafters drafting the bills that you're acting on instead of hiring kids who are really good with a word processor but don't know anything at all about drafting legislation because it's cheaper. Frank goes on to say, I am in support of a part-time legislature for the purposes that it can probably bring in, encourage more talent to be able to participate in the legislative portion of government. But I want to be assured that in the formation of this part-time legislature, there is adequate time for the necessary and proper functions and duties, which is kind of like saying, yeah, I'm for it, but I want to reserve some of my criticism. So I may be saying I'm really for it because I know that's the politically correct thing to say. And he goes on to say, the legislature is the holder of the purse strings of the government. As a check and balance, you want to make sure that you have that ability to be able to continue to oversee that this money is being spent the way it's meant to be spent. Is that what we're doing now? As opposed to because you're not in session. You can only do this when you're in session. Frank, when you're in session, you're sitting at your desk inside the session hall, and you're not really overseeing anything except the matter that happens to be on the floor at that time. He goes on to say, so they say we need to spend money, so we had an emergency declaration or some other trick to be able to spend it. I'm just not convinced, Frank. I'm just not convinced. I think you're looking for, I think you don't want part-time legislature, and you're looking for cover. I was really for it, but when I saw how the first sentence in the third paragraph was punctuated, no, that was too much for me. I can't support that. Okay, staying with the legislature for a little while, we've got James W. Moylan versus the Attorney General. James has got a good idea, but I don't know that his idea is ready for part-time yet. With the objective of reducing government expenditures, Senator James Moylan introduced three major, and by the way, this is from PNC. PNC gave him the wrong middle initial. They call him James C. Moylan. Everybody knows that he's James W. Moylan. I'm going to correct that. Senator James W. Moylan introduced three measures Monday morning, of which he has also indicated will be the first of several which he plans on introducing this term, focused on achieving similar intentions. He's got Bill 17-36, prohibits the funding of deputy directors under the executive branch. This is a similar measure to what Senator Moylan introduced in the 35th legislature, the bill that was never given the opportunity to advance. But he also attempted similar amendments to both the fiscal 2020 and fiscal 2021 budgets. The motions failed on both occasions. And it's also similar to the bill that was the subject of an Attorney General's opinion issued on December 28th of 2018. Question, does chapter blah, blah, blah violate the separation of powers doctrine in that the legislature imposed conditions on an appropriation which impinges on the executive? Boy, I wrote this question. And the legislation in question is this. This came from Public Law 34-116. Funding of unclassified deputy director and similar positions prohibited, notwithstanding any other provision of law, rule, regulation, etc., beginning January 7, 2019, executive branch departments and agencies receiving appropriations under this act shall not be authorized to expend any government funds for the purposes of employing unclassified positions with the title of deputy director, etc. And this is what the Attorney General said. The 2012 AG opinion and our office's response to October 15, 2018, to DOA addressed general hiring freezes to include classified employees. Both rely on the Organic Act and the governor's authority to appoint executive branch employees. Such authority stems from the Organic Act, which states in part, quote, the governor shall appoint and may remove all officers and employees of the executive branch, except as otherwise provided in this or any other act of Congress or under the laws of Guam. And then the Attorney General says the governor's broad authority to appoint all employees in the executive branch is not conditioned on whether the position is classified or unclassified. Based on the foregoing, the legislature's prohibition on the hiring of unclassified deputy directors violates the separation of powers doctrine and is inorganic or unenforceable. So there you go, Jim. Good idea, but not ready for prime time yet. Maybe some very skillful drafting would allow you to thread that needle, but I don't think you've got it with Bill 17. Jim goes on to Bill 18, and he proposes to stop any payments to the Pacific Islands Development Bank for 2021 and further prohibits an appropriation for 2022 as well. This is a good idea. The legislature last time appropriated $1 million to the Pacific Islands Development Bank. You want to know what the Pacific Islands Development Bank does? So do I. So do I. It's a boondoggle.
They take our money.
Yeah.
We give it to them.
They take our money and they pay it staff, and it's our way of supporting our Micronesian brothers and sisters. It's not a good idea. So good shot, Jim. And then Bill 19 proposes to eliminate the Guam Liaison Office, which is another measure he introduced in the 35th, which was also not provided the opportunity to advance. Well, the Office of the Governor currently funds the D.C. Liaison Office through their budget. This legislation would permanently repeal this mandate. So for those of you who don't remember what the Guam Liaison Office is, 2 years ago when Michael San Nicolas beat Madeline Bordallo in the Democrat primary and Doris Brooks in the general election and became our delegate to Congress, I guess there was some feeling, gee, we got to find a job for Madeline in Washington. And then, some of the chatter you heard was, oh, Madeline's got so many contacts. She knows all of the old guys in Congress, and they just love her at cocktail parties. So, we'd be really doing ourselves a favor if we could keep Madeline on the payroll, and she probably wants to stay in Washington anyhow. So let's have a Guam liaison office, and let's put Madeline in charge of that. I don't remember how much we're paying her, but let me list all of the accomplishments that we're aware of that we can attribute to Madeline since she's been running our liaison office. Are you ready for this, Jose? That's the end of the list. I'm not aware that she's done anything back there. So off to a good start here, Jim Moylan. We need to eliminate a whole lot more officers and positions and things like that just on general principles, not to mention the fact that money is going to be really, really tight this year. So there'll never be a better time to do it than right now. So let's break for the 7th inning stretch.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts. Brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Okay, Google. Hey, Siri. Hi, Bixby. Go ahead. I'm listening.
Open the Point app.
Opening.
Live stream, on demand, swap stations, check out the visual radio. Get the free app available on the App Store and Google Play, or go to thepoint.gu.
So here we are, 7th inning stretch, Wrigley Field in Chicago. And who do I have on the line but a staunch Cub fan? None other than Another Joe. Hello again, Another Joe.
Hey, Bob. Regarding, was it Bordallo, you would think the Democrat Party would want to list her accomplishments, what she's involved in.
I think they do.
And they're saving lots of paper.
I think they do want to list her accomplishments. There's only one thing holding them back.
The accomplishments.
Yeah, she doesn't have any. But go on, Another Joe.
So the other thing is, if Moylan doesn't get any attention for his bill, to eliminate the contribution to the Pacific Island Development Bank, then he should possibly think of going to Delegate Congressman San Nicolas and make sure that that's on the list of reimbursement to government of Guam for the compact impact.
So our argument would be this. to the feds. You guys, Secretary of the Interior, we stupidly gave $1 million away, right, to this Pacific Islands Development Bank. So you now have a duty to stupidly reimburse us for our stupid expenditure. The argument has a lot of symmetry, Another Joe, but that's about all it's got to recommend it.
Well, I mean, it's supposedly an issue of foreign policy. Keeping these COFA countries on the side of the USA. But I called up regarding. It seems as though that, and I was listening to see if you were going to mention that Congressman Blas was going to get in on the action on characterizing Trump as a bad guy, but I haven't heard anything yet, and so I'm thankful for that. I think, unless I wasn't listening enough. But on the local Guam station, which I will not name, night talk, radio talk show at night after 6 p.m. There was a talk show on the other radio talk show, or the other radio station. They were characterizing Trump as a bad person or a bad leader.
Well,
so I just wanted to bring that up because I don't know. You would think the issue is there needs to be proof first, or the people need to be able to defend the opposite side. But they're definitely characterizing President Trump as deserving of being removed. So I just want to bring that up to Tall listeners, the nation, Tall Nation.
Well, another Joe. I've always been a champion of free speech here on Tall Tales, and I've given callers an absolute right to be dead wrong, even if after I've given them the correct explanation. They can be dead wrong if they so desire. That's permissible. And if people want to listen to another station other than Tall Tales on the Ray Gibson Show or Tall Tales, it is a free, I can't understand the logic of it.
Well, the logic
it doesn't make Another Joe, it doesn't make any sense to listen to another radio station when you've got Tall Tales. But Another Joe.
Sorry.
I'm trying to make a point here. I'll get there. Just be patient, okay?
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. None of this makes much sense to me, but I've always been such a champion of free speech that even if people want to listen to another talk show, I say, go ahead. I'm not even going to criticize them for doing it. I guess sympathy would be the more appropriate emotion, Another Joe.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for your time, and I'll just keep listening.
Okay, Another Joe. Yeah, Another Joe. I got a feeling, well, let's see, we got about 20 minutes to go. I got a feeling we haven't heard the last of Another Joe. Okay, now we're going to talk about Tall Tales versus Van. And I hope I got enough time to do this today. Van is an old friend of mine. He's about my age. We went to school together. We played football teams and basketball teams together. And when we were really small, we grew up about 3 houses from one another. So, Van had a good Midwestern 1950s upbringing. I don't know what happened to him. Somehow he got off the rails, and now he holds himself out as a progressive. Yeah, and he did a hitch at the University of Wisconsin. That more than likely had a lot to do with it. Madison.
Oh, okay. Explains everything.
Yeah, well, Paul Soglin, who used to be the mayor of Madison, described his city as 74 square miles surrounded by reality. That's Madison, yeah. So Van sent along this article by a guy named Brett Stevens, who's a columnist. It was a column that ran in the Times. And the title of it is Impeach and Convict Right Now. Trump is too dangerous to leave in office for even another minute. And Van sent this along There was no sound effects of clapping hands along with his email, but he sent it along. And I won't read the whole thing, just some of the points here. It wasn't too hard to see when it began, that it would end exactly the way it has. Donald Trump is America's willful arsonist, the man who lit the match under the fabric of our constitutional republic. The duty of the House of Representatives and Senate is to reconvene immediately to impeach the president and then remove him from office and bar him from ever holding office again. To allow Trump to serve out his term, however brief it may be, puts the nation's safety at risk, leaves our reputation as a democracy in tatters, and evades the inescapable truth that the assault on Congress was an act of sedition, aided and abetted by a lawless, immoral, and terrifying president. Yeah, and if I ran into Brett, I'd say, Brett, why don't you just come out and tell us what you really think?
Are they having a contest, these journalists there, who can out-actor each other?
Who can out hyperbole the other? Yeah.
This is awesome.
From the moment, and this is the key here. This is the key. From the moment Trump became the GOP frontrunner in 2015. So we're not talking about the 6th of January. From the moment he became the front runner in 2015, it was obvious who he was and where, if given the chance, he would take America. He was a malignant narcissist in his person, a fraudster in his business, a bully in his relationships, a demagogue in his politics, and he didn't have good table manners either. He did not have ideas, he had bigotries. He did not have a coalition, he had crowds. He did not have character. He had a quality of confident shamelessness, the kind that offered his followers permission to be shameless too. Offered his followers permission to be shameless too. This goes back to 2015 now. All this was obvious, but not enough to stop him. America in 2015 had many problems, many of which had gone too long ignored and were ripe for populist exploitation. But by far the biggest problem of that year was that a major political party capitulated to a thug. And the biggest problem of every subsequent year has been that more and more of that party has excused, ignored, forgiven, colluded in, and celebrated his thuggery. Skip ahead a little bit. But there is no getting away from the extent to which the leading party members and their cheerleaders in the right-wing media are complicit in creating the political atmosphere in which this Visigothic sacking of the Capitol took place. The legal hucksters from Rudy Giuliani to Mark Levin, who promoted demonstrably debunkable claims about election fraud, are complicit. All of those are supposedly sober-minded conservatives. He didn't mention my name here.
Debunkable. If a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, did it make a noise?
All of those supposedly sober-minded conservatives who encourage the president to pursue his legal options, knowing full well they were bunk, but with assurance that they would settle doubts about the validity of the vote, are complicit. Let's see. Above all, this president, above all, there is the president, not complicit, but wholly, undeniably, and unforgivably responsible. Now, here we go again. For 5 years, Republicans let him degrade political culture by normalizing his behavior. For 5 years, they let him wage war on democratic norms and institutions. For 5 years, they treated his nonstop mendacity as a quirk of character, not a disqualification for office. For 5 years, they treated his rallies as carnivals of democracy, not as training grounds for mob rule. For 5 years, they thought this was costless. On Wednesday, forgive the cliche, but it's apt here, their chickens came home to roost. Now, who is this they that have let all of these things go on for 5 years? 5 years, 5 years, 5 years, 5 years. I'm one of them, you know, and how many people voted for Trump?
A little more than half the nation.
Yeah, about half, a little more than half the nation were parts of these chumps, these horrible people. And this guy now is saying, we've been telling you all this time. We told you so. And you were so stupid that you kept on with it for 5 years. So he says there's only one prescription for now. Impeach the president and remove him. Ban him forever from office. Let every American know that in the age of Trump, there are some things that can never be allowed to stand. Most of all, Trump himself. Let's go to Churchill Downs, and then on the home stretch, I'll tell you what I wrote back to Van concerning this.
Rolling sound, quiet, and action.
The Ray Gibson Show, starring Senator Mana Silva Tyron as the news anchor.
I'm Mana Silva Tyron, and I'll have your local news every morning. Life moves pretty fast, so stay with us to stay informed right here on The Point.
Also starring Jerry Roberts as the Better Business Training Guru.
Get out there and do something good today, like listen to us Monday through Friday, 6 to 10 a.m., where we go extra for you.
Produced by the real Joe Cruz. And your warm and intelligent host, Ray Gibson.
It's the Gibson stream of consciousness. All the players and all the games with cameos and calls from the most interesting people like you. We'll see and hear you right here on your talk radio superstation. This is The Point.
The Ray Gibson Show was filmed before a live Facebook audience.
Want to win $100? Join the Guam Visitors Bureau's Protect Guam campaign series to show how you're helping our island in the fight against COVID-19. There are 2 ways to win. Upload your photos or videos to visitguam.com or share on social media how you're wearing your mask, showcasing Guam heroes, or staying active and healthy with the Protect Guam hashtag. Don't forget to download the Guam COVID Alert app. Let's protect and support each other through these tough times. For a chance to win $100, check out visitguam.com.
Okay, so here we are, Churchill Downs, Louisville, Kentucky, getting ready for the home stretch. And I'm going to ride down the home stretch with my old friend, Van. So after, I explained to you what the column that Van sent along was seeming great approval. I wrote back to him and said, wouldn't you rather have him drawn and quartered, Van? And I followed that up with, were it only available, punishment by drawing and quartering would obviously be preferable to Stevens. That's the guy that wrote the column. Had he limited his scope to January 6, Stevens would have had more than enough material to proclaim his opinion. Stevens goes back 5 years to make his case. This allows him to condemn not just Trump, but also his allies, fellow travelers, and ultimately us. That is, those of us who Hillary branded a basket of deplorables and, according to Brock, cling to their guns and religion. I typify much of Trump's support. People back him not for what he is and does, but for what he isn't and doesn't. Unlike those on the port side, He doesn't support sexual anarchy, infanticide, critical race theory, and other aspects of neo-Marxism. While he took control of the executive branch, he hasn't attempted to change the basic structure of our federal system. I've posed this question and answer before in the face of vigorous criticism of Trump. Question: assuming arguendo that everything you say about Trump is true, how did such a man ever get elected? Answer: because of the overreach of the left. Trump was not the problem. Trump was the solution. And then, obviously, this can never be allowed to happen again, as far as Stevens is concerned. Stevens, let every American know that in the age of Trump, there are some things that can never be allowed to stand. Most of all, Trump himself. By going back 5 years, Stevens lays the foundation for the purges that have already begun. Like, are you now or have you ever been a Trump supporter? What about your friends? What are their names? Now, the internet is full of all of these attempts, all of these statements that those who supported Trump can't be let off scot-free. They've got to be punished. The punishment of Trump and his supporters is the necessary foundation for prophylactic measures that the left will put in place now that we are a one-party state. More erosion of our system of federalism. For starters, example, the National Popular Vote Initiative, which makes the Electoral College a dead letter, so that the Acela corridor and the left coast can run the country without the annoyance of flyover country. Statehood for the District of Columbia. And let's see here. Notwithstanding the pronouncement of the heroine of the left, 9 Supremes aren't nearly enough. The court must be enlarged to 13 members to restore the balance Trump destroyed. Biden made his support of critical race theory clear in the selection process of his running mate. So that's my little note back commenting on why, the Democrats, if they could, and I put a footnote here just to make sure we know what we're talking about. From Wikipedia, to be hanged, drawn, and quartered was from 1352 after the Treason Act in 1351, a statutory penalty in England for men convicted of high treason. Although the ritual was first recorded, I don't have the rest of it. Oh, excuse me, yeah. To be hanged, drawn, quartered was from 1352 after the Treason Act of 1351, a statutory penalty in England for men convicted of high treason, although the ritual was first recorded during the reign of King Henry III. For reasons of public decency, women convicted of treason were instead burned at the stake. So I guess even back in the 1300s, we were practicing a little identity politics. Okay, so that's Tall Tales versus Van, and I notice I've got somebody waiting in the green room. Okay, the most dangerous man in the room. When you talk in terms of things like burning at the stake, drawing and quartering, this is the playground in which he amuses himself as the most dangerous man in the room. Carl Nelson. Good afternoon, Carl.
Hey, good afternoon, Bob. Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in on that piece you were reading, that opinion piece. I just found it ironic, especially that word thuggery. What is it, this guy? Is he a quotation mark journalist, or what's his?
Yeah. He's an
Yeah, these are largely the people, the class that.
He's an opinion columnist. Yeah.
Okay. Well, they largely ignored very, very little criticism of the 7 months of burning, looting, rioting, the destruction of entire neighborhoods, thousands of small businesses burned or looted. Just so the righteous indignation it rings a little hollow. But as far as putting this in perspective, that I seen an estimate there was roughly around 40,000 people at this Washington D.C. event on January 6th, if I'm remembering right. And I saw an article recently which said that there are now 150 people who are being charged. And so, whatever percentage 150 is of, 35, 40,000 people, it's far less than 1% of people that were had gone in and done this damage. It's wrong, no matter how many did it, but, need to put it in perspective. And I think a lot of people are who write these kind of righteous indignation opinion pieces are really missing the picture. And some of these, 150, I'm sure, are, in one case, Andy No, who is an independent journalist who reports regularly on Antifa and BLM. He spotted a BLM member in the video, Mr. John Earl Sullivan, a BLM activist, who was there, and when this lady was shot in the chest, tragically killed, they were still examining her when he started yelling out, they killed her, the cops killed her, and he was going, up and down the this crowd trying to fan the flames, of anger, and he was going around telling everyone he could get a hold of, the cops killed her, they shot her, trying to, incite this, and it worked. I mean, there's people that really got pretty upset. But, I think we need to put it in perspective as far as how many of these roughly 40,000 people were actually in the building and even knew this was going on. My understanding is that the crowd who went into the Capitol were there or almost there before Trump even got done talking. They were they didn't even stay for the whole event. So there was a certain percentage that were they were feeling pretty strongly about this. But the majority of people, when I looked at the video, it was pretty peaceful. I mean, outside there were, it was tens of thousands of people as far as the eye could see, and I didn't see any burning.
Well, Carl, the point I wanted to make is that what happened on January 6th is good grist for any columnist mill. You can write a lot about that. You can make your points. You can make your point about Trump, about Democrats, about Republicans, civil disobedience, all kinds of stuff. But that wasn't good enough for this guy. He had to go back 5 years. And what he did was he pulled the curtain back and saw us what's really going on with that whole gang over there on the left. Trump was wrong from the very beginning, even before he was elected. And we saw that, they were talking about impeaching him before he was even sworn in, literally. So what this columnist is doing, he's saying, we were right all along. We told you, dummies, but you're so dumb that you were sucked in by Trump And now he and you must all be punished. Perhaps re-education camps, etc., because there is a right way to do things, and it's over here on the left. And if you can't understand that, then we run the risk of another Trump again. And, of course, my response to that is, well, I sure hope so.
Yeah, I saw an interesting comment, and I kind of reworded it, and I posted a meme of my own about it. And it's really, I think, an appropriate thought. And that is, in what country or dimension is it not an in-kind contribution to steer information or control information in certain ways in order to bring about the election of a favored candidate?
Like spiking the story of Hunter Biden's laptop, you know.
That's a classic example, and that's worth billions and billions of dollars. The Google, you know, with their algorithms, you know, controlling who sees what information. What, you know, when you type in Trump, search results come up Hitler and all this stuff. You know, and when you type in Biden, you know, it's totally different result. But to me, it's an in-kind contribution, and it's worth several $1 billion, in my opinion. Anyway, Bob, I can hear the music, so I'll let you go.
Yeah, always good talking to you, Carl. We'll be back again tomorrow for more Tall Tales. See you all there, Tall Gators.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Decision Day in the House. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. The House of Representatives will vote today on impeaching President Trump for the second time in 13 months.
The lone article of impeachment accuses President Trump of incitement of insurrection by willfully making statements that encouraged and foreseeably resulted in lawless action at the Capitol last week. The impeachment resolution is the product of House Democrats, but it will have some bipartisan support, including from Wyoming Republican Liz Cheney, a member of House Republican leadership.